This chart tracks Cambodia's steady population growth up to 1975. Over 80 years, the population quadrupled, swelling to 8 million. Then, the data violently plummets. Between 1975 and 1979, the Khmer Rouge eradicated roughly 2 million people, nearly a quarter of the entire country. The society that replaced those millions was systematically dismantled. Cities were forcibly emptied as residents were marched into rural labor camps. Currency was abolished in favor of a barter system, and religion was aggressively outlawed. The regime focused its violence on the bourgeois, anyone linked to the educated or upper middle class, doctors, teachers, or simply those who wore eyeglasses, was marked as an intellectual subversive and executed to make way for an agrarian utopia. The man who engineered this anti-intellectual revolt was known to his followers as Brother Number One, but history remembers him simply as Pol Pot. But Pol Pot was a pseudonym.
He was born Saloth Sar, and he wasn't a peasant. He was the son of one of the district's most affluent families, a landowning household with 20 acres of rice paddies and direct connections to the Cambodian royalty. Sar's upbringing was one of elite privilege. He was educated in Roman Catholic colonial schools alongside the children of the French community. Despite being a poor student, his family ties secured him a prestigious engineering scholarship to study in Paris in 1949. This is the central contradiction of the Khmer Rouge. The man who orchestrated the systematic murder of Cambodia's educated class to build a peasant state was himself an affluent, European-educated student from the very social class he sought to destroy. While living in Paris during the late 1940s, Sar was inducted into the Cercle Marxist, a secretive organization of Cambodian students who met to discuss communist writings and the struggle against French rule. His intellectual commitment to the cause was shallow. Sar later admitted that he could not actually comprehend the writings of Karl Marx he claimed to follow, struggling to grasp the economic theories he was supposedly championing. Instead, he was captivated by a zealous, unyielding nationalism. He became obsessed with the idea of continuous, violent revolution, an interest that was entirely divorced from any concern for the human cost. His ideology was a hollow hybrid, a total commitment to violent upheaval without a grounded economic or theoretical framework to sustain the state once the fighting stopped. Sar returned to a volatile Cambodia in 1952, navigating the country's shift from French rule to the conservative dictatorship of King Norodom Sihanouk. The catalyst for the state's total collapse was the spillover of the Vietnam War. Massive U.S. bombing campaigns in the Cambodian jungles, designed to hit Viet Cong supply lines, destabilized the entire region. These indiscriminate bombings destroyed the livelihoods of rural Cambodians. Alienated and desperate, hundreds of thousands of these peasants fled the countryside to join the ranks of Sar's newly branded Khmer Rouge insurgents. International interference provided the exact societal fracture necessary for a fringe extremist to succeed. The geopolitical destruction of the 1970s allowed a radical minority to build a massive, radicalized army out of the ruins of the rural economy. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh. Pol Pot immediately implemented his vision of absolute self-sufficiency, forcing millions of city dwellers into the countryside at gunpoint. He ordered the systemic murder of the educated and the upper middle class, direct opposites of his own French education and his family's 20-acre estate. His agrarian policies failed mechanically. The forced labor camps operated on the logic of slave labor, and because the regime purged those with technical expertise, actual food production plummeted. The result was rampant malnutrition and mass starvation. Camp overseers, terrified of being executed for failing to meet quotas, routinely faked production yields to the central government, making the famine even more lethal. The regime responded to its own failures with paranoia. They established over 150 execution centers, like S21, and initiated the mass killings in the killing fields for anyone deemed non-compliant or suspicious. Democratic Kampuchea was not a functioning state or a Marxist experiment. It was a nationwide death camp built on the violent insecurities and hypocrisy of its architect. By 1978, Pol Pot's extreme xenophobia turned outward. His regime began launching disastrous border raids against Vietnam, a move that would ultimately break his hold on the country.
The response was a full-scale invasion by battle-hardened Vietnamese troops. They shattered the Khmer Rouge forces and captured Phnom Penh in just a matter of weeks in early 1979. In the fallout of 1979, Cold War priorities took precedence over the mounting evidence of genocide. The United Nations and several Western powers chose to recognize the ousted Khmer Rouge as the legitimate government of Cambodia, pointedly ignoring the administration that had just ended the killing. This international recognition and the accompanying aid allowed a genocidal regime to survive in the shadows. Pol Pot was artificially resuscitated, enabling him to wage a guerrilla war from the jungle for another 10 years. Pol Pot spent his final years in a state of isolation. After losing control of his own fractured party, he was placed under house arrest in the jungle by his former allies and died in 1998 without ever facing a true international tribunal. He left Cambodia a nation littered with landmines and burdened by deep generational trauma. A quarter of the population was gone, and the country's entire social and economic infrastructure had been systematically erased. Pol Pot was a product of high society who sacrificed millions of lives to create a peasant utopia he had never experienced. He finished his life in a jungle hut, having successfully erased the very world that produced him.